It was raining, of course. It's always raining when your life cracks open. The kind of rain that taps against courthouse windows like it knows secrets and isn't afraid to leak them. I sat there, clutching my reusable coffee cup like it was a flotation device, trying not to look as soaked and small as I felt. Across from me, David, my husband, smiled like he was in a dental commercial. Polished, crisp, wearing the exact cologne I'd bought him 3 anniversaries ago. He nodded at me like we were running into each other at Trader Joe's. I gave him a blink. No smile. I didn't have any left. When the judge entered, everyone stood. I felt like a fourth grader at a spelling bee. All the grown-ups suddenly had better posture. Our lawyers began their introductions using phrases like amicable separation and no minor children. Like that made it all cleaner. But nothing about this was amicable. David's attorney leaned into the mic and said, "My client has expressed concerns about his wife's emotional instability." There it was. He hadn't even waited 10 minutes. I stared at the wood grain on the table in front of me, tracing the patterns like they were instructions for staying calm. I wanted to shout, "I'm not unstable. I just had feelings and he manipulated every single one of them." But I didn't shout. I didn't even blink. Because that's what emotional women do in court. We blink too fast and it looks like we're cracking. My attorney, Mia, squeezed my arm lightly. She was younger than me by at least a decade, but she had courtroom swagger. She wore black like it was her armor and tapped her pen with rhythm when she was thinking. She said, "We deny the characterization, and we'll address that with evidence." Oh, we would. I just didn't know what kind yet. David looked like a man reading from a script. He used the word concerned 5 times. Concerned I had outbursts. Concerned I wasn't managing stress appropriately. Concerned about the emotional environment in the home. He sounded like a TED Talk on passive aggression. Meanwhile, I could feel mascara spidering down my cheek. My hands were clammy. I thought about how many times I had cried in that marriage. Quietly, always in the bathroom, behind a closed door. But now, here in public, I cried because I was being watched. After the hearing ended, the judge didn't make any rulings, just took notes. He asked us both to return in 3 weeks with full financial disclosures and any supporting documentation regarding the allegations. David gave me a little nod on the way out, like we were teammates in a game of courtroom charades. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the street still reflected the overhead lights. I stood under the overhang of the courthouse steps, trying to process it all. Mia joined me, shaking water off her umbrella like a seasoned noir detective. She said, "He's trying to build a case for diminished credibility. He wants to paint you as unstable, so you'll back off the asset division." Is that common? Mia looked at me, her eyes sharp. Only when the husband's got something big to hide. We didn't speak again until I got home and peeled off my wet blazer. I poured a glass of wine that I didn't really want and sat at my desk. There was a stack of old documents there. Tax forms, utility bills, and David's old laptop, which he'd left behind when he moved out. The screen was smudged. His desktop background was a stock photo of a mountain he never climbed. I hesitated. I knew his password, same as always. Blue Bike 2017. The year he bought a bike he rode 3 times, then left to rust. I press enter. The system welcomed me with a cheery chime. And that was the moment, the very second when I stopped being too emotional and started being curious. What I found inside that laptop, well, we'll get to that. For now, just picture me there, still damp, mascara streaked, sitting in silence as a dull glow lit up my face. I wasn't out for revenge. I wasn't even angry. I was just tired of being the only one telling the truth. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, the laptop still sitting on my desk like an unopened letter from someone who owed me an explanation. I padded across the cold floor in socks and poured myself a cup of coffee that tasted more like burnt apologies than caffeine. I wasn't sure what I was looking for yet, but I knew I needed to look. David and I had shared everything for nearly 11 years, until we didn't. Now, the only thing we were sharing was a courtroom and a slow-burning resentment. The idea that he had not only walked out, but painted me as too emotional, gnawed at me with the hunger of unfinished business. I opened the laptop again. Same background, same smug mountain. This time, I went looking. He'd always been a little lazy with digital housekeeping. Everything was vaguely labeled, no folders for taxes or resumes, just random file names like budget_final_final.doc and screenshot3.png. But one folder stood out, personal_A 2020, like a government file that had been classified and then half-heartedly renamed. I clicked. Inside were subfolders, letters, docs, MISC, and, wait for it, therapy. I had never known David to go to therapy. Heart thudding, I opened the folder. Inside were scanned notes, most from a counselor I didn't recognize. Notes with his name at the top, and a whole lot of underlined text about boundaries, validation seeking, and controlling partner behavior. It wasn't my therapist, and it didn't sound like me. Then I noticed something chilling. The therapist's notes weren't handwritten or typed with any recognizable tone. They were pieced together, cut and pasted. Half of them were copied from mental health blogs. Literally, copied and pasted from articles with headlines like, "Signs You're in a Toxic Relationship" and "How to Document Your Spouse's Mood Swings." I recognized the style because I'd read some of them myself back when I thought it might be me who needed fixing. Except now, I was staring at evidence that David had fabricated an entire therapy journey for the court. The file names were dated in batches, always just before key events. The day he moved out, the first court filing, and even a few days before a visit from our mutual friend Rachel, who later told me she was worried about how I'd been acting. He'd sent people in to observe me. I was a character in a play I didn't audition for. I backed out of that folder like it was radioactive, moved to the letters folder. There were emails, hundreds of them, some to women I didn't know, full of flattery and familiarity. One even started with, "You're the first person who's really seen me in a long time." Charming. Others were even worse. Messages to his attorney, organizing how to build a trail to show emotional instability. They discussed me like I was a marketing problem. My meltdowns were, quote, assets. My journaling was potentially useful if subpoenaed. My crying, document every incident in writing. I couldn't breathe. These weren't just thoughts, they were plans. Carefully plotted steps to tell the world a version of me that didn't exist. A version that cried for no reason, forgot to take her meds, and yelled over toast. And the worst part? I'd started to believe some of it. For years, David had this way of rewinding arguments to make me feel like I had misremembered them. We'd fight, I'd cry, and he'd say things like, "Wow, this is what I'm talking about. You always go from zero to sobbing." It was like being gaslit in HD, emotional manipulation dressed up as concern. He told my mom I was struggling. He told my best friend he just wanted what's best for me. I was out here bleeding, and he was out here holding a red pen editing the narrative. So yeah, I downloaded every file, every email, every disjointed blog quote he tried to pass off as mental health notes, and I backed them up to an external hard drive, labeled "For Court." That night, I went out to the balcony with a fleece blanket and watched the apartment lights blink across the street. I thought about every time I doubted my memory, every time I'd apologized for a tone I didn't mean, every time I told myself I was just being too emotional. I had asked him once, years ago, if he thought I was dramatic, He laughed and said, "No more than average, but it's part of your charm." Part of my charm. That same charm was now being used as legal kindle. I closed my eyes and let the cool breeze press against my cheeks like reassurance. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was unraveling. I felt like I was about to knit something back together. And this time, the thread was all mine. I didn't sleep much that week. Not because I was upset, though I was, but because I was busy. I became a woman on a mission, armed with a highlighter, legal pads, and an understanding of how email forwarding worked. Turns out, when you know someone's patterns, you can almost hear their tone in plain text. I read through hundreds of messages. Some were innocent. Office complaints, restaurant receipts, long-winded customer service rants. But woven in between were threads of something darker. Exchanges with his lawyer titled things like narrative notes and incident planning. Women he'd flirted with online and then ghosted. Requests to document the next outburst if possible. Outburst? I hate that word. One email stood out. Subject line, Joe's barbecue. Body. Try to bring up the grocery meltdown if she brings up the joint account. Don't overdo it, just concerned. He was workshopping my life like it was a Netflix pilot. And yes, that grocery store incident came up in court, right on schedule. Let me tell you about Trader Joe's. Picture me, one tired woman in leggings, no makeup, trying to pick out non-dairy yogurt while holding back tears over a $17 overdraft fee and the fact that my husband had just told me he needed space to figure out his future. I didn't scream. I didn't knock over a display of kumquats. I just stood there, frozen, milk in one hand, wallet in the other, eyes glassy. A manager came over, gently asked if I was okay. I whispered, "I think so." Then I walked out without buying anything. My hands were shaking too badly to tap my card. Apparently, David had followed me. From a distance. He'd taken photos. None with me doing anything alarming, just standing, looking overwhelmed. But he submitted them anyway, as part of his case. "You can see she's not in a stable mental state," his lawyer said. I'm sorry, what exactly does emotional distress look like in grocery store lighting? Is it the way I didn't buy oat milk? Or was it the fact that I didn't notice someone treating my heartbreak like paparazzi bait? I gave Mia all of the emails. She asked if I was ready to make them public. Ready? I asked. I'm furious, but I'm not interested in fury. I'm interested in facts. We had to be strategic. Too much at once, and it might seem vindictive. Too little, and we'd miss the chance to flip the narrative. Mia smiled. We'll present them at the evidentiary hearing. Clean, timed, and admissible. I don't know if you've ever spent a Sunday organizing evidence of your own gaslighting, but let me tell you, it's surreal. I had to sit there and arrange my pain into folders, neatly labeled for the court. I color-coded the timeline, emails, photos, memos between him and his attorney, and yes, quotes he'd copied from mental health articles passed off as personal reflections. I printed one of the copied sections and highlighted the phrase, emotional instability with borderline tendencies. Then I searched that exact phrase online. First result, a Reddit post from 2018 written by someone asking how to handle a toxic coworker. Reddit. He was diagnosing me with Reddit. In another message, he had written to a friend, "She's going to blow soon. I can feel it. Just need to push gently." Need to push gently. That line haunted me because I remembered the exact day he sent that email. It was a Tuesday. I had tried to talk to him about the checking account being overdrawn. He was unusually cold, almost clinical. When I started crying, he stood and walked out mid-sentence, didn't return for 3 hours. And now I understood. He was manufacturing the breakdown he wanted to present in court, like a director building toward a climax. Here's the twist he didn't see coming. I was keeping my own notes too, and mine didn't need Reddit to be convincing. One evening, I sat on the floor with all my evidence spread out around me like puzzle pieces. I pulled up a document and typed in the title, Character Timeline, Events and Emails. David always said I was too sensitive, that I remembered things in technicolor. He meant it as an insult. Now, it was my secret weapon. I remembered everything. I remembered the way he called me high maintenance when I asked for help moving a couch. I remembered how he turned off the bedroom light when I was still reading on my birthday. I remembered how he flinched when I told him I felt anxious and asked for a hug. I started building my own story. His actions, my reactions, the digital fingerprints he left behind. And each time I filled a new column in my spreadsheet, I felt less crazy, more certain. David once told me, after one of our fights, you always overreact. That's your pattern. But here's the thing. Even when the storm is inside you, there's a difference between a reaction and a response. And I was learning how to respond with clarity, not chaos. So yeah, he tried to use a Trader Joe's moment as proof I was unhinged, but all it really proved was how closely he had been watching, planning, waiting for a photo op. And now, I was the one holding the camera.
The days blurred together like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. I stopped keeping track of what day it was and started measuring time by how many emails I'd reviewed or how many memories I'd fact-checked. The court had given us 3 weeks before the next hearing, and I was using every minute like it was gold. But there was something about those late nights. The hum of the laptop fan, the occasional sound of the city below, that started changing me. I wasn't just trying to protect myself anymore. I was beginning to reclaim something I hadn't realized I'd lost, my own narrative. One email haunted me more than the rest. Subject, RE grocery breakdown follow-up. He'd forwarded the photos he took of me at Trader Joe's. Then he wrote, still think this is our best example. Wish he had yelled. Would have made it cleaner. Cleaner. That word hit me like cold water to the face. He wanted a scene. He wanted me to scream, throw something, sob on camera, something loud enough to make the judge squint and go, maybe she is unstable. But I hadn't given him that. All I had done was stand still, hold back tears, and walk out empty-handed. It wasn't the breakdown he wanted. But apparently it would do. I printed that email and highlighted it in yellow. Mia was going to love that one. As the evidence stack grew, I started noticing patterns in his behavior. Every argument we'd had in the final 6 months of our marriage followed a formula. First, dismiss. Then, provoke. Then, retreat. Finally, record. He'd bait me into reacting, then step back just far enough to make my reaction seem unprovoked. He even had a digital trail to prove it, but only if you didn't look too closely. Unfortunately for him, I was looking very closely. One night I was scrolling through an old email chain when something odd caught my eye. The thread looked ordinary at first, restaurant reservations, movie times, boring stuff. But at the bottom was a forwarded message titled, Accidental Recording? I clicked. It was an audio file, and it started with David's voice saying, just pretend I'm not here. I want to catch the tail end of her mood. Then muffled footsteps. My voice in the distance. I was singing, in the kitchen, just singing. Not crying, not yelling, just off-key humming as I made soup. And that was it. That was the whole recording. I laughed, soft, disbelieving, a little bitter. He'd tried to record my mood and caught me in the middle of chopping carrots and belting out a Beyoncé line. That's what he'd sent to his lawyer as evidence. My God, if that wasn't the most unintentionally poetic thing he'd ever done. I forwarded the file to Mia with the subject line, "My evil singing voice strikes again." She replied 5 minutes later, "This is gonna be fun." In the final few days before our next court appearance, I started preparing emotionally. I wasn't a natural fighter. I'd spent most of my life avoiding confrontation. In our marriage, I had always been the one to apologize first, even when I didn't know what I was apologizing for. But this wasn't about ego anymore. It was about truth. Mia called me for a final prep session. She asked, "Are you ready?" I said, "I'm scared, but yeah, I'm ready." "Good. He thinks you'll cry and spiral. Don't. Let the evidence do the talking. Let him spiral." I knew that David had counted on my emotions to cloud everything. He thought I'd choke in court, tear up, or stumble over my words, maybe even storm out. But I had something better than anger. I had documentation. On the day of the hearing, I wore a soft navy sweater, comfortable flats, and minimal makeup. No mascara this time, no running lines, just clear eyes and evidence. David showed up with that same smugness, like he thought he'd already won. His lawyer wore a confident smirk. I didn't even look at them. The judge greeted us, asked for any new materials, and Mia stood up. "We'd like to submit additional evidence, Your Honor. Emails, recordings, and fabricated therapy notes." David blinked. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Fabricated?" "Yes," Mia said, sliding a USB across the table, "complete with timestamps, source material copied from online articles, and email instructions outlining their use to influence perception of my client's mental state." There was a beat of silence so deep I could hear my own pulse. David shifted in his chair. His lawyer whispered something, fast, urgent. The judge plugged in the USB, he scrolled, clicked, read. Then he said, "Let's take a short recess. I need time to review this in chambers." And just like that, the energy changed. David avoided my eyes as we stood up. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I didn't say a single word. I didn't need to. For the first time, silence was enough. Back in the hallway, Mia turned to me. "We may not even need to call you to the stand. This is, honestly, it's a takedown." She paused. "Are you okay?" I nodded. "More than okay. I feel like I just found my voice again."
The judge took longer than expected in chambers, and we sat there in that cold hallway with its flickering light and faint scent of disinfectant. I tried to focus on my breathing. In through the nose, hold, out through the mouth. I'd learned that during yoga class, back when I still thought David and I were just going through a rough patch. Mia leaned against the wall, scrolling through her phone, looking unfazed. I envied her coolness, the kind of practiced composure that could only come from dealing with dozens of men like David. Across the corridor, David was pacing. His lawyer was whispering something that involved a lot of animated eyebrow raising and hand gestures. He wasn't smiling now. His shirt collar had gone a little limp, and the perfect wave in his hair was beginning to unravel. The cracks were starting to show. And for once, it wasn't me cracking. When the bailiff called us back in, I stood with a quiet steadiness I hadn't felt in years, not since before David began eroding me one casual remark at a time. Small digs disguised as concern, the way a sculptor chips away at stone but never builds a thing. Back in the courtroom, the judge cleared his throat. "I've reviewed the submitted materials," he said. "I have some questions." He turned to David. Mr. Lester, can you confirm whether the therapy notes you presented as evidence of your wife's instability are your own original documentation or excerpts from third-party sources? David blinked. They're, uh, notes I compiled. Compiled from where? He hesitated. From articles I read, to help me understand what was happening. Were these presented to this court as professional assessments? David's lawyer jumped in. Your Honor, I believe my client misunderstood the formality of the documentation process. I'm not speaking to you, counselor. The judge interrupted. Silence. David swallowed. I didn't mean to mislead anyone. I just thought it supported the reality of how difficult things had become. And the emails, the judge continued, his tone even but sharp, indicate you instructed your attorney and acquaintances to frame your wife's behavior a certain way. Do you dispute the authenticity of these messages? David looked like a kid caught cheating on a test, still holding the answer sheet in his hand. They were private conversations, but the intention was public. And now, so are the contents. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. The judge turned to Mia. Counsel, do you intend to proceed with witness testimony? Mia shook her head. Only if necessary, Your Honor. The evidence speaks for itself. Indeed it does. He paused, then looked back at me. Miss Lester, would you like to make a brief statement before we continue? I hadn't prepared one, but I stood. My voice was quiet but steady. I spent the last 2 years trying to figure out if I was broken or just misunderstood. My husband told everyone I was unstable, but I was just exhausted. Exhausted from being edited into a version of myself that only existed when he needed to be the reasonable one. I looked over at David. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. But peace doesn't come from silence, it comes from truth. And this, I gestured gently toward the USB now sitting beside the judge, this is the truth. I sat down. My hands were calm, my pulse a quiet hum. The judge leaned back in his chair. We will recess for 15 minutes, after which I'll issue a preliminary ruling regarding asset division and character allegations. 15 minutes. 15 tiny, buzzing, surreal minutes where I sat like I was floating just above the courtroom, watching my life tilt on a quiet hinge. David didn't look at me again. His lawyer was furiously typing. Somewhere in the building, a printer was chewing out papers like a nervous tick. When the judge returned, he spoke quickly. Given the fabricated documentation and evident attempt to manipulate court perception, I find the plaintiff's allegations of emotional instability to be without merit. Furthermore, the defendant, he nodded toward me, has provided substantial evidence of good character, credible behavior, and undue psychological pressure during the marriage. Therefore, I am awarding her primary asset consideration as well as a majority division of shared accounts. David's jaw actually dropped. I'd always thought that was just an expression, but no, it dropped. He opened his mouth to speak, but his lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder, gently, like saying, "Please don't ruin this further." The judge continued, I will also be issuing a formal admonition regarding misuse of mental health resources in legal proceedings. Formal admonition. Translation, you played a cruel game and lost. Court adjourned. Just like that. No gavel bang, no dramatic exit, just the soft rustle of people packing up their files and the occasional wow from the back row. I stayed in my seat for a second too long, just breathing. That sound of victory, it doesn't come with fireworks. It's quieter than you think, like an exhale you didn't know you were holding, like the creak of a courtroom bench beneath your finally unburdened weight. When I finally walked out into the sun, yes, the sun, like the weather was in on it, I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just looked up, let the light hit my face, and said quietly, to no one in particular, "So much for too emotional." I didn't go home right away. Instead, I took the long way through the city. I walked with no destination in mind, just letting the rhythm of my steps carry me past corner cafes, small bookstores, and people who had no idea a courtroom had just unglued itself around me. I bought a croissant I didn't eat, stared into a boutique window for 10 minutes without realizing I was watching my own reflection, not the display. I felt light, like I'd been peeled of something. Grief, maybe. Or illusion. When I did finally reach my apartment, the silence was kind. Not lonely, not heavy, just mine. I kicked off my shoes and dropped onto the couch like a marionette whose strings had been cut. Then I saw it. My phone blinking. Voicemail. One new message. No name, no number, just blocked caller. I listened. And there he was. David's voice. He must have recorded it the night before the hearing. "I know you probably won't pick up. You're probably with your little lawyer friend, sharpening your claws. That's fine. I just wanted to say, you don't have to do this. You really don't. We can still settle quietly. You're not going to come out of this looking good. You never do. You cry, you fall apart. It's your pattern." Pause. "I don't want to destroy you, okay? I just want this to end." And then, as if it were punctuation, he added, "But if you make me look bad in there, I'll make sure you regret it." Beep. I sat there for a long time, phone still in hand, listening to the fan buzz gently in the corner. He hadn't even tried to hide the threat. He really thought it was persuasive, like we were still dancing the same tired choreography where he leads and I follow. Like the silence of voicemail meant he was still the one controlling the story. I saved it. Didn't send it to Mia. Didn't need to. The court had already ruled. It wouldn't change anything legally, but it confirmed everything I already knew. David didn't want closure. He wanted control. Even in the final hour, even after all the masks had dropped, he still believed he could talk his way back into power. It was a habit he couldn't break. Talking over truth with charm. Later that night, I poured myself a glass of water and sat down at the desk where it had all started. The same desk where I first opened that laptop, where I first realized I wasn't crazy, just carefully mischaracterized. I opened a new document and typed one sentence. This is where I start over. The next few days passed like the quiet after a long storm. Everything around me was still the same dishes in the sink, same half-dead plant on the windowsill, but I wasn't the same. I no longer jumped at phone calls. I stopped checking the mailbox like it might explode. I even got through a full day without rereading the court transcripts. The change didn't arrive like a sunrise. It came slowly, like the moment you realize your shoulders are no longer tense, that you're breathing easier, laughing at things again, that you've stopped imagining someone reading your diary aloud in court. Still, there were odd moments. Like the time I saw a man on the street wearing David's exact jacket and felt my whole body go cold before I realized it wasn't him. Or the time a cashier said, "Are you okay?" And I almost burst into tears because no one had asked me that in a way that didn't sound suspicious in years. But mostly, there was relief. A strange, almost boring kind of peace that felt like a luxury hotel I hadn't earned. I kept finding remnants of David around the apartment. A mismatched sock under the bed, his old key in the junk drawer, a bottle of cologne that had fallen behind the bathroom sink. I threw none of it out in a fit of rage. No dramatic burning ritual, no Facebook post about cutting toxicity. Instead, I boxed it slowly, methodically. I labeled it archive, sealed it, stored it in the back of the closet like a museum piece from a life I no longer lived. Some people say closure is a myth. I disagree. Closure is real, but it doesn't look like a big moment or a neat ending. It looks like walking past your old favorite restaurant and not feeling the need to text someone about it. It looks like deleting a number not out of a spite, but because you just don't need it anymore. One night, about a week after the hearing, I went to a pottery class, something I had bookmarked online for months but never had the nerve or the time to try. I made a cup. It was uneven, a little lopsided. The lip dipped in one place like it had been kissed by gravity. But it was mine. I took it home and placed it on the shelf beside the books I used to read when I was trying to learn how to fix myself. Turns out, I didn't need fixing. I just needed freedom. And clay helps. The thing about healing that no one really warns you about is how ordinary it feels once it starts working. There's no triumphant music, no freeze-frame moment. One day you just catch yourself humming while brushing your teeth or dancing while folding laundry, and it hits you. Oh, I'm okay now. Or at least close. 3 weeks after the ruling, I was standing in my kitchen making pancakes on a Tuesday. Not because anyone was coming over, not because I had something to celebrate, just because I felt like warm carbs and maple syrup were the right way to start the day. That was when Mia called. "Hey," she said, already sounding like she'd been up since dawn. "You sitting down? Should I be?" "Your ex-husband's attorney just submitted a formal withdrawal. He's stepping off the case." I paused, spatula in midair. "Wait, what?" "Yeah," she said. "Apparently your husband wants to change legal strategies. Though from what I hear, there's not much left to strategize. The ruling's already in effect. But people like David, well, they don't like staying down." I flipped the pancake. "So what does this mean for me?" "Nothing. You're in the clear. He can appeal, but the court already cited evidence tampering and misrepresentation. If he tries anything else, it's going to backfire faster than you can say, 'Be careful what you BCC.'" I actually laughed. First, real, belly-deep laugh in a while. After we hung up, I sat down with my pancake, real butter and all, and thought about how far things had come since that first hearing. David, for all his planning, never thought he'd lose the script. He assumed he'd win because he always had, with charm, with control, with a few well-timed lies dressed in concern. He used to call me fragile, like it was a diagnosis. Now I realized I had never been fragile. I'd just been interrupted. Now, no one was interrupting me. That afternoon, I received an email from someone I hadn't spoken to since college, Jen. She'd seen a mutual friend's cryptic Facebook post about the hearing and decided to reach out. "You probably don't remember this, but you once helped me through a breakup in the middle of finals week. You brought me soup and sat on the floor with me while I ugly cried about someone who didn't deserve me. I've never forgotten that. Just thought you should know." I stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, "I remember. I always thought you were the strong one." She replied almost instantly, "Funny. I thought that about you." There was something healing about that little exchange, like remembering who I had been before David, before the courtroom, before the emails and the silence and the constantly walking on eggshells. David didn't make me who I was. He just made me forget. Later that week, Mia sent over a digital folder labeled Final Docs. It was everything.
the judge's ruling, the asset list, transcripts, and one neat little PDF labeled closure statement.pdf. I opened it, expecting legalese. Instead, it was a standard form David had signed agreeing not to contest the character ruling or seek any defamation-related damages related to the emails. It was the closest thing I'd ever get to an apology, and it wasn't even addressed to me. But that was fine, because the apology wasn't the point. The truth was. After reviewing all the files, I closed my laptop, got up, and did something I hadn't done in over a year. I danced in my kitchen. No wine, no audience, just me and a playlist that had collected dust in my Spotify. I danced to old favorites, from everything from 90s R&B to cheesy indie pop. I laughed, I twirled in my socks, I sang into a spatula like I was headlining at Madison Square Garden. And for a few glorious minutes, I remembered what it felt like to take up space without apology. The emails had been read, the truth had been said, and the noise of his voice no longer lived in my head. That weekend, I had coffee with Rachel, the friend who had, unknowingly, acted like David's courtroom spy. She had tears in her eyes when she sat down. "I feel awful," she said. "He told me you were going through something, that you didn't want company, that I should give you space. And I believed him." I nodded. He was convincing. "You're nothing like how he described you." "I never was." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I let her. Because the thing about healing, it doesn't mean you trust everyone again right away, but it does mean learning when someone's trying to show up for you and letting them. I started making a list, not a to-do list or even a goals list, more like a collection of small, rebellious pleasures. Things David had rolled his eyes at, things I had once loved. Wear mismatched socks, order dessert first, sang in the shower, loud, read trashy novels without hiding the covers, light candles for no reason. You wouldn't believe how much joy can come from a single lavender candle and a slice of cake eaten standing over the sink. It wasn't about being dramatic. It was about being allowed. You see, when you live with someone who constantly measures your responses, your choices, your tone, you stop trusting yourself. You start shrinking, not all at once, but in tiny, daily edits. Now I was expanding again, slowly, like a balloon you forgot had air in it. I began to notice how quiet my apartment really was. Not the creepy kind of quiet, but gentle. Soft, the kind that wraps around your shoulders and whispers, "You're safe here now." One morning, I finally opened the closet where I had stashed the archive box. It sat there like a museum artifact, full of David's leftovers, his high school baseball trophy, a tie I once gave him that he never wore, a pack of flash drives, and at the very bottom, a torn envelope addressed in his handwriting. I didn't recognize it. Inside was a printed letter, dated a year before he left. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even mean. It was calculated. A rough draft, maybe. "I need to start gathering material. If she melts down, that'll help me. Need to talk to Karen about how to bring this up in court without making it look like a setup." I sat down slowly on the edge of my bed, letter in hand, heart strangely still. So it was a setup. From before the end even started. He'd been scripting the exit long before I'd realized we were even on the stage. I folded the paper, put it back in the envelope, and sealed the box shut with a strip of tape. Then I took a Sharpie and crossed out archive. I wrote, "Not mine anymore." And I slid it into the farthest corner of the hallway closet behind old towels and a box of Christmas lights. Maybe one day I'd throw it away. Or maybe I wouldn't. Because part of healing isn't about deleting the pain. It's about knowing where you left it and choosing not to carry it around anymore. That night, I went to bed early. No anxiety playlist, no melatonin, just me, the hum of the ceiling fan, and a growing sense that I was going to be okay. Then, in the middle of the night, my phone buzzed. I blinked at the screen. A message. Unknown number. Just 5 words. You made me look bad. No punctuation, no name. But I didn't need either. I didn't reply. I didn't even get angry. I just blocked the number, turned off my phone, and went back to sleep. That used to be impossible. Not the blocking part. I always knew how to press buttons. I mean, the sleeping part. For so long, my brain had been wired to stay alert, listening for the change in his footsteps, watching for the sigh that meant a lecture was coming, reading every text twice to check my tone. Now, sleep came softly, not because everything was fixed, but because he no longer had the key to the room where I kept my peace. The next day, I made an appointment with a therapist, not for court, not for paperwork, just for me. Why now? She asked gently during our first session. Because I spent a long time thinking I was the problem, and now that I know I'm not, I need to figure out what to do with all this space he left behind. She smiled. That's a good place to begin. I didn't cry. Not yet. But I knew I would. And this time I wouldn't apologize for it. Because here's the secret about being too emotional. It's only a problem for people who don't want to deal with real feelings. People who benefit from your silence, your restraint, your self-editing. But emotion, that's how we survive. That's how we know we're still here. So, yeah, I was emotional and honest and messy and healing and finally, unafraid.
The day the court's final paperwork arrived in the mail, I held the envelope like it might hiss at me. It was plain, beige, printed with my name in the top left corner, like a reminder that, at last, I was the only one who belonged at this address. I opened it slowly, carefully peeling the flap like it was a Band-Aid over an old bruise. Inside, the official ruling, a list of assets, custody of items neither of us wanted, like that hideous lamp from his uncle, an exact figure in my bank account now legally separate from his, and one simple sentence that felt like a thunderclap in a whisper. All character-based allegations are hereby dismissed with prejudice. That meant he couldn't bring them back. Not now, not ever. My so-called emotional instability had been buried under the weight of his own receipts. It was over. I thought I'd feel electric, vindicated, triumphant, but mostly I just felt quiet. Like the end of a movie where the hero doesn't walk away with fireworks, just an empty street and the sound of their own footsteps. Later that night, I poured a glass of wine, walked over to the bookshelf, and pulled out an old notebook I used to keep before marriage, before David, back when I scribbled poems on receipts and stuck song lyrics to the fridge. I flipped through pages filled with clumsy handwriting and hopeful lines. Some of it was embarrassing. Some of it made me smile. All of it was mine. Then I remembered something I hadn't thought of in years. The voicemail. Not the threatening one. The other one. Years ago, when we first started dating, David had recorded a voicemail on my phone as a joke. It was supposed to be romantic, his voice saying, "She can't come to the phone right now because she's busy being perfect." I thought it was cheesy at the time, but I kept it anyway. After the trial, after the dust, after the inbox was empty, I found that old recording saved in a forgotten iCloud folder. I listened to it once. He sounded younger, softer, less calculated, back when his affection didn't come with footnotes and strategy. And then I deleted it. Not out of bitterness, but because I no longer needed a reminder of who he pretended to be. I had spent so much time thinking I'd never get closure unless he apologized, unless he crumbled, unless someone shouted from the rooftops that I was right and he was wrong. But closure doesn't wait for permission. Sometimes it comes quietly in the form of paperwork and peace and clean voicemail storage. A week later, I packed a bag and drove to a cabin I'd found online. 2 hours from the city, surrounded by trees that whispered instead of judged. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. No dramatic social media captions, just a text to Mia. Taking a break. No courtrooms allowed. The cabin was tiny. 1 room, a kitchenette, a porch swing, and a fireplace that crackled like it had secrets. The first night, I sat outside with a mug of tea and stared up at the stars. They looked like pinholes in a velvet curtain, and for once, I didn't narrate it in my head, didn't wonder what someone else would think, didn't reach for my phone to capture it for later. I just watched and listened and breathed. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of everything I'd missed while trying to manage someone else's story. Here's a little secret you learn after surviving people who try to rewrite your reality. Your silence is sacred. They'll try to invade it, fill it, redefine it. But once you reclaim it, truly reclaim it, it becomes your loudest form of self-respect. The second night, I lit a fire and journaled for the first time in years. No prompts, no structure, just messy, honest handwriting that said, "You are no longer someone's evidence. You are someone's beginning, maybe even your own." I stayed at that cabin for 3 full months. No drama, no noise, no judgment. Just healing. In a world David would never enter again. The last morning at the cabin arrived without ceremony. No dramatic sunrise, no sentimental soundtrack. Just the kettle boiling, a bird tapping once against the window, and the steady hush of pine trees waking up around me. I sat on the porch swing in mismatched pajamas, sipping the last of the grocery store tea I'd bought 3 months earlier. It had gone stale. I didn't care. I looked out over the damp grass, the woods that had cradled me so quietly, and I tried to think of what had changed. Not the world. It hadn't changed. I had. I had come here cracked open. Not shattered, exactly. Just peeled back, raw. Like something waiting to be turned into a story, but not yet sure of its plot. Now, I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't reacting to David. I wasn't writing mental speeches. I wasn't looking for signs or closure or the right Instagram caption. I just was. I packed my things slowly, not because I was sad to leave, but because there was no longer any rush. The version of me that always moved with a hint of tension in her shoulders was no longer driving. The last thing I put into my suitcase was a new notebook. Blank pages, crisp cover. I hadn't written in it yet, and for once, that didn't make me anxious. It made me feel infinite. I locked the door behind me and left the key in the ceramic bowl shaped like a maple leaf. The cabin owner had told me it was made by her daughter. Not perfect, she'd said with pride, but sturdy. That stuck with me. I drove home with the windows down, letting the air slap my hair in a way that used to annoy me. This time, I liked it. When I got back to my apartment, I noticed the small things. The scent of eucalyptus from a candle I didn't even remember lighting. The way my bookshelf had subtly rearranged itself, like the stories were breathing easier now. And a package at the door. It was from Mia. Inside, a simple glass paperweight, engraved with one line. You told the truth. I placed it on my desk, the same desk where everything began. And I cried. Not the kind of crying David used to mock, not that shaky, embarrassed hand-over-your-face crying, just soft tears. The kind that come when something inside you finally unclenches. I thought about everything that had happened. Every email, every photograph, every whispered doubt. I thought about the girl in the grocery store aisle, frozen with oat milk in her hand, trying not to fall apart while being watched.
And I wanted to hug her. Not to tell her she was strong or brave or beautiful, but just to sit beside her, to let her cry, because she was never too emotional. She was just human. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm. No nightmares, no clenched fists, just a soft stretch and the realization that I was, finally, fully home. Not just in my apartment, in myself. I made a real breakfast, put on music I hadn't listened to in years. I danced a little while cooking. Offbeat, definitely. Graceful, not even close. But free? Completely. I caught my reflection in the mirror. Hair a mess, socks unmatched, face flushed with sleep and sunlight. And I smiled. Because this was the face of someone no longer trying to prove anything. Not to a man, not to a judge, not to anyone. Except, maybe, to the girl who once believed her silence was safer than her truth. She knows now.